Ever been pulled over for something you didn't do? This driver found himself in a bizarre situation when he was stopped for expired registration, only to realize the cop had pulled over his own car. What happened next? You won't believe it. It started like any routine traffic stop. Broad daylight, quiet suburban road. A sleek black sedan rolls to a calm stop after the flashing lights hit the rear view. The driver, a well-dressed black man in his 30s, signals, pulls over, and keeps both hands visible. He's done this before. No speeding, no reckless driving, just a calm man going about his day. But the moment the officer steps out of the cruiser, something feels off. He doesn't approach with a question. He walks up like he's certain of guilt. His voice cuts the air like a blade. Registration's expired. Step out of the car. The driver, composed but visibly confused, responds, "Sir, I just bought this vehicle last month. The tags are current." He reaches slowly, calmly, for the envelope in the glove box. But the officer's hand drifts toward his holster. "Hands where I can see them," he snaps. People walking their dogs begin to glance over. A neighbor peeks through a window. The man freezes. What should have taken 90 seconds turns into 9 minutes of humiliation. He's asked to place his hands on the hood. The officer walks in circles around the car, muttering things like, "Doesn't look like this belongs to you," and "These luxury models don't usually end up in hands like yours." The driver doesn't argue. He knows better. He just stands there, heat rising off the pavement, heat rising under his skin. Then, the moment. The officer runs the plate. There's a beat, a flicker of disbelief on his face. He radios again, confirms the VIN. And suddenly he stiffens, because the vehicle isn't just legally registered, it's registered in his own name. His full name, his old badge number, his address. The driver watches the blood drain from the officer's face, because what started as racial profiling just turned into something much stranger and much more serious. This isn't just a wrongful traffic stop. It's a story about wrongful arrest, abuse of power, and police misconduct, and it's about to go viral. This is not your average dash cam drama. It's a case of identity confusion, civil rights violation, and a shocking twist that even internal affairs didn't see coming. Bodycam footage would later reveal everything. But in this moment, standing by the roadside, all that exists is a deep silence between two men, one stunned, the other still holding back the truth. Because what the officer doesn't realize is that this driver wasn't just anybody. He was waiting, watching, investigating. And this was the test. His name was Julian Mercer, a senior systems engineer, public speaker on digital ethics, and mentor at a community STEM center in Atlanta. At 34, Julian wasn't just successful, he was meticulous. The kind of man who triple-checks the pressure in his tires, keeps scanned copies of his car documents in the cloud, and greets every officer with, "Yes, sir," even when his pulse is sprinting. He knew the game. Stay calm, stay polite, stay alive. Especially in a neighborhood where the wrong tone, the wrong expression, the wrong outfit could get you labeled a threat. The sedan in question was a midnight black 2020 Audi A6 with tinted windows and custom leather seats. Impressive, but not outrageous. Julian had won it in a government auction 2 months earlier. He'd done the research, verified the title, and transferred ownership cleanly. The car had been seized by federal authorities from a law enforcement officer under investigation for misconduct and financial crimes. What Julian didn't know, yet, was that the officer was Sergeant Grant Tolbert, the very man now accusing him of theft on the side of a Georgia highway. Sergeant Tolbert wasn't just another beat cop. He had once worked internal investigations, a position often reserved for those considered by the book. But rumors of suppressed reports, botched corruption cases, and unexplained cash movements had shadowed his career. Eventually, after one too many red flags, he was quietly reassigned to patrol duty, an apparent demotion wrapped in public silence. His pride had taken a hit, so had his wallet. And when his prized sedan disappeared from impound faster than he expected, he assumed the matter had been buried, out of sight, out of mind. until today. As Julian stood outside the car, spine straight, hands visible, the weight of injustice pressed down like Georgia heat. Grant circled the vehicle again, as if looking for a reason, any reason, to escalate. His tone shifted from procedural to personal. You know, this car's not something guys like you usually get their hands on, not unless someone handed it to you. Julian didn't take the bait. He offered no resistance, just facts. Sir, the title's in my name. Clean purchase. You're welcome to scan the QR on the window sticker. I keep my DMV verification right there. Grant ignored him, radioing dispatch with a strained voice. Requesting backup, possible 1066, suspicious vehicle, may be stolen or connected to prior law enforcement equipment. Julian blinked. Suspicious? He asked softly, his voice steady but cold. You're reporting a car for being registered to... you? Grant flinched. The words hit like a dart, because deep down, he had seen the registration info. He just didn't want to believe it. Minutes later, another squad car rolled in. Officer Bailey, younger, more by the book, stepped out with cautious curiosity. She glanced between the two men, one seething, the other unshaken, and asked for an update. Grant gave a vague summary, omitting key facts. Julian, unfazed, calmly handed over the printed title, matching ID, and bill of sale with the official DOJ auction stamp. Bailey scanned them silently. Her brows furrowed, then lifted. Everything looks clean, she said. Actually, impeccable. But Grant wasn't letting go. He leaned into Bailey and whispered something out of earshot. She glanced once more at Julian, unsure, then back at the documents. Grant motioned toward the trunk. We need to search it, he said. Probable cause. Bailey hesitated. Based on what? He gave no real answer. Julian knew his rights. He knew what was legal. But he also knew what refusing a search could spiral into, especially on camera, especially when emotions overruled protocol. You can search, he said, but I want this entire interaction recorded. I want accountability. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, passers-by, people stepping out of nearby businesses. Several held up phones, recording silently. One woman whispered, "That's Julian Mercer. He helped fix the district's school servers last year. He's a good guy." But perception wasn't on Julian's side, not yet. Inside the trunk, officers found precisely what should be there. A first aid kit, tire iron, jumper cables, gym bag, and Julian's presentation briefcase. No contraband, no weapons, no surprises. Except, tucked inside the briefcase, they found a thick government folder marked Federal Asset Tracking Log, DOJ Internal Case File, number 382K. Grant froze. He knew that case number. He'd seen it months ago, in the final report detailing the suspension of multiple officers, including himself, from asset mismanagement during high-profile busts. He hadn't been named directly, but he'd always suspected the case was still active. Now, here it was, in the hands of the man he'd just tried to humiliate on the side of the road. But Julian still said nothing. He simply looked Grant in the eyes and asked, "Anything else you want to search for, Sergeant?" Grant's hands twitched. His breathing changed. For the first time, he didn't look like the man in control. He looked like the man cornered. He turned to Bailey. "Call this in," he said quietly. "This guy's a plant." Bailey hesitated. "A plant? For what?" Julian answered for him. "Maybe for integrity." Officer Bailey didn't respond right away. Her hand lingered near her radio, but she didn't press the button. Something about Julian's tone, not hostile, not defensive, just razor-sharp clarity, made her pause. "What do you mean, a plant?" she asked again, slower this time, eyes narrowing toward Grant. Julian didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he stepped carefully back toward his car, opened the driver's side door, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a thin laptop bag. Unzipping it, he revealed a government-issued Surface tablet, slid it across the hood, and opened a secure document. Bailey and Grant both stepped forward. There, glowing on the screen, was a sealed communication chain from the Department of Justice's Office of Civil Rights Oversight, DOJ OCR. The timestamp? 2 weeks ago. The subject line read, Active Field Audit, Incident Response, and Law Enforcement Conduct Monitoring, ATL Div. Grant's jaw tightened. Bailey looked at him now, not with trust, but with something closer to suspicion. "You're on an audit list?" she asked Julian quietly. "I'm on the team," Julian replied. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because the truth hit harder than outrage ever could. This wasn't just a stop-and-go incident. This was the tip of an iceberg, one where racial profiling, police misconduct, and abuse of power were being quietly tracked by the very system that officers like Grant thought they could manipulate. And Julian Mercer wasn't a random motorist. He was the embedded observer. Grant tried to brush it off. "So what? They let IT guys run ops now?" But Bailey didn't move. She studied Julian's face, then the open file, then back at Grant. "If he's here with OCR, and you flagged a clean car registered to yourself, do you understand how that looks?" "Oh," Grant's voice cracked. "He's setting me up." "You ran his plates," she said flatly. "You pulled him over. You escalated. You searched without cause. So, explain to me who's setting up who." The crowd had grown. Not in volume. No one was shouting. But in presence. Phones were recording. Voices were whispering, and tension hung like static electricity. The entire interaction was being streamed now. Julian had noticed 2 different Facebook Live badges on phones in the crowd, at least 4 camera angles. He didn't need to say a word. The story was writing itself. One young man in the crowd murmured, "This the kind of Bodycam footage they try to bury." Another added, "Nah, this man is the Bodycam." Bailey stepped aside, hands on her belt. "Sergeant, I'm going to advise you to step back and let me handle the scene from here." Grant flared. "I outrank you." "Not today," she replied. "Not in front of all these people, not with civil rights investigations in play." Grant stepped back, but only physically. Mentally, he was unraveling. He watched as Julian calmly returned to the driver's seat and unlocked a second compartment under the console, removing a laminated credential tucked inside a shielded envelope. It wasn't a badge, not officially. It was a field verification card, the kind issued to embedded oversight liaisons working directly with the DOJ. It didn't need flashing lights or dramatic reveals. It just sat there, solid, documented, time-stamped, undeniable. The air changed, not just for the officers, but for the people watching, for the parents with sons like Julian, for the teachers who knew what it meant to be accused first and heard second, for every person who had ever asked, "What if I wasn't recording?" Grant stepped forward again, voice a notch louder now, as if desperation might overpower the facts. "Why didn't you identify yourself immediately?" Julian finally looked directly at him. "Because that's not how this works. My job isn't to make your day easier. My job is to see how you behave when you think no one's watching." Bailey lowered her gaze. The words stung, not just because of what they meant for Grant, but what they revealed about the department as a whole. How many other stops had gone like this, with no folder in the trunk, no camera in the crowd, no one on the inside? Dispatch crackled on her radio. "Unit 14, status check?" She answered quickly. 10 to 26, standing by, requesting a supervisor on site. We have a DOJ oversight presence confirmed. Repeat, DOJ presence confirmed. There was a long pause. Then the voice came back crisp. "Supervisor en route. Advise all units, full recording protocol." Julian stood quietly, hands at his sides. Not triumphant, not smug, just still. He knew what was coming next, because he'd seen it before. From a dozen other stops, a dozen other officers who'd crossed the line because they didn't believe accountability had teeth. Because they thought body cam footage could be erased, that civil rights complaints went nowhere, that a man like him couldn't possibly outrank a badge. They were wrong. And now so was Grant. 30 minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out, calm, composed, tablet already in hand. She introduced herself to Bailey. then to Julian. She didn't speak to Grant at all. She didn't have to. As she began reviewing footage from Julian's tablet and syncing timestamps with patrol dashcams, Bailey quietly pulled Julian aside. "Why go through all that?" she asked. "You could have just said who you were from the jump." Julian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "If I had, none of this would have been real. You wouldn't have spoken the way you spoke. He definitely wouldn't have, and I wouldn't have gotten the footage I needed." Bailey nodded slowly. It wasn't admiration on her face, but respect. A few feet away, Grant sat on the curb, elbows on knees, head in his hands. The weight of the moment had settled. There was no yelling, no violence, just the quiet sound of a system finally turning inward. Because when power is abused in silence, it festers. But when the truth is caught on tape, when justice has receipts, it spreads. By the time the Internal Affairs SUV rolled away, the street was clear, but the fallout had just begun. What had started as a traffic stop had now become a high-stakes exposure of systemic issues: racial profiling, police accountability, civil rights violations, and something far deeper. What happens when the people sworn to protect the system think they're above it? Julian didn't go home that evening. He went to a federal building downtown and turned over every recording, timestamp, and detail from the encounter. His camera hadn't just captured Grant's actions, it had recorded the tone, the intent, the language, and most damning of all, the moment the officer realized the car he tried to accuse someone else of stealing used to be his own. Every second of that footage spoke louder than any report ever could. But what happened over the next 72 hours would turn a local case into a national headline. It began with a clip, 37 seconds, uploaded by a bystander. The title read, "Cop pulls over black driver, then realizes it's his car, DOJ involved." It hit 1.2 million views overnight. The video showed Julian, calm and still. Grant, agitated, defensive. The screen freezes the moment Grant stares at the registration. The caption reads, "The look when you realize the system you abused just logged in." By morning, local outlets picked it up. By noon, national media ran the story. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox aired segments on it, debating not just the conduct of Sergeant Grant Tolbert, but the deeper question: how many stops like this happen without a camera, without a Julian? In response to the media frenzy, the department held a press briefing, but said very little. They confirmed an ongoing internal review and stated that officer conduct will be evaluated per department standards. But Julian had already seen that playbook. Vague statements, temporary suspensions, quiet reassignments. That wasn't enough. So he did what he was trained to do. He filed a formal federal complaint, not just against Grant, but against the entire department's traffic stop review procedures, citing patterns of misconduct, lack of transparency, and failure to intervene. This wasn't about one officer anymore. It was about a broken culture. Late that week, Grant appeared on a local AM radio show with a sympathetic host, trying to reframe the narrative. He claimed he felt threatened, and that Julian had refused to identify himself, and that the entire thing was a misunderstanding taken out of context. But context was his enemy. The footage, clean, unedited, time-stamped, told a different story. It showed no threats, no aggression, just a man being calm, methodical, and entirely legal while being treated like a suspect. That same day, DOJ officials released a statement clarifying Julian's role. Mr. Mercer was authorized to conduct live oversight operations in collaboration with federal review teams. His presence was not only lawful, it was intentional. Just when the department thought they could contain the fallout, a second video was leaked. This one from Grant's own Bodycam, obtained through a FOIA request filed by a civil rights journalist. The clip showed Grant in his cruiser before the stop. He spots Julian's car, narrows his eyes, and mutters, "That looks like my old ride. How the hell did he get that?" Then louder into the mic, "Plate check. Let's see if this guy's got priors." He had no probable cause, no expired tag, no broken taillight. It was pure vehicle profiling, and worse, retaliation for a car he believed was still his. The leak went viral. Hashtags trended. DOJ Justice mashed own car. Stop. Police reform now. Had Grant got caught. And the pressure mounted. Talk shows exploded with debates. One side claimed Julian was baiting the officer, that he set a trap. Others pointed out that if the stop had gone as it usually does, without witnesses, without footage, Julian could have been jailed, worse. Civil rights attorneys appeared on news panels. This is not a setup, one said. This is a stress test of police conduct, and this officer failed. Julian's inbox flooded. Hundreds of messages, from college students, pastors, teachers, veterans, even retired cops, thanking him for staying calm, for speaking truth, for not letting it slide. But some messages weren't kind. Threats, doxing attempts. Online mobs are accusing him of being anti-police. Julian had expected this. Surveillance was part of his life, but this time it was personal. The incident triggered an emergency session at City Hall. Hundreds showed up. Julian didn't speak, but his presence filled the chamber. Parents stood to tell stories of their sons being pulled over for tinted windows, driving while black, or matching a vague description. Teachers shared how they had to train their students on how to stay alive during traffic stops. A retired judge stood and said, "This is the first time I've seen an accountability case break through the noise in years." The council voted to recommend an external federal audit of the entire department. The mayor issued a public apology, not to save face but to admit failure. Grant was placed on administrative leave without pay, pending the outcome of multiple investigations. That weekend, Julian returned to the STEM Center where he volunteered. A group of teenagers sat in a circle watching the now viral clip on a projector. When it ended, no one spoke at first. Then a 14-year-old asked, "Did you know that was going to happen?" Julian took a breath. "I didn't know it'd be him," he said. "But I knew something would happen. I didn't record to catch anyone. I recorded to protect the truth. Because without proof, people forget. They rewrite it. They say you looked aggressive or weren't clear. But with proof, it speaks for itself." Another student asked, "Were you scared?" Julian answered honestly, "Yes. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't do it." Following public outcry and Julian's formal complaint, the Department of Justice launched a pattern or practice investigation into the department, focusing on biased policing, traffic stop abuse, and improper asset seizure practices. Julian was asked to contribute findings. He submitted a 6-page report, not just on Grant, but on other cases he had quietly observed. Data, footage, officer histories, misconduct logs, red flags are buried in bureaucracy. What they uncovered was alarming. Multiple officers had flagged luxury vehicles at higher rates when driven by black motorists. Stops were longer, searches more aggressive, and language more condescending. And the most disturbing finding? Over 70% of the time, those stops led to no citations, no arrests, no charges, just humiliation. The DOJ's findings confirmed what communities had been saying for decades. 2 weeks later, another officer came forward anonymously. She submitted text messages between Grant and a colleague from months ago, joking about taking back his ride if he ever saw it again on the road. One text read, "If some dude rolls up in my Audi, I'm cuffing first, asking later." Those messages were submitted as evidence. The misconduct case was now airtight. The department had no choice but to proceed with termination proceedings against Grant Tolbert and multiple internal policy revisions across all patrol units. By the end of the climax, the system didn't collapse. It began to correct itself, not through vengeance, but through exposure, through truth, through quiet resistance backed by unshakable documentation. Julian Mercer didn't scream. He didn't retaliate. He recorded. He complied. He endured. And because he did, an entire city was forced to reckon with how deeply injustice hides behind routine. The storm didn't come in on sirens. It came in silence, recorded frame by frame. The department thought they could weather the storm. They had seen scandals come and go, news cycles that burned bright for a few days, then disappeared in the smog of distraction. But this wasn't fading. Not this time, because Julian didn't walk away. He walked in. The public didn't know it yet, but Julian wasn't just some tech expert tagged along for documentation. He was part of a pilot DOJ initiative, launched quietly, designed to embed trained oversight agents inside real-life police interactions, to observe firsthand, collect civil rights violations, and analyze bias patterns in the field. And Julian? He wasn't the backup. He was the lead analyst. For months, he'd been reviewing misconduct cases and flagging officers across several departments in the Southeast. Grant Tolbert's name had appeared twice, buried in redacted files, protected by opaque disciplinary codes and pending review statuses. That car, the Audi seized in an asset forfeiture, had been tagged as suspicious in the DOJ system. But it was Julian who traced it back to Tolbert, then noticed the discrepancy in how fast it vanished from internal reports. The car was more than transportation. It was a breadcrumb, a leftover clue in a case that had been swept under the rug. So Julian made a decision. He filed for legal ownership of the vehicle, not just as a civilian buyer, but as a strategy. And the moment Grant pulled him over, it was as if the final piece had been forced into place by the one man arrogant enough to believe he'd never be held accountable. Over the next 10 days, Julian compiled what the DOJ referred to as a clean grid, a complete digital timeline, time-stamped radio logs, bodycam footage, audio transcription, officer assignment history, social media metadata, dispatch response delays, citizen video overlays, and perhaps most importantly, racial disparity heat maps of traffic stops across the district. Each element on its own could be brushed off as an error. But together, they painted a brutal truth. Julian had been stopped because he was black, and because someone didn't want to believe a black man belonged behind the wheel of a car once driven by a white cop. Julian's findings were so well documented, the DOJ assigned a litigation team to prepare a civil rights investigation under 34 U.S.C. Sector 12601, a pattern or practice probe that allows the federal government to intervene when police departments demonstrate systemic misconduct. A week later, a letter landed on the mayor's desk. The U.S. Department of Justice is initiating a formal investigation into the East Clayton Police Department, focused on patterns of racial discrimination, vehicle stops lacking probable cause, and violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. Meanwhile, Grant's legal team attempted a counteroffensive. They floated claims of mental stress, emotional trauma, and professional sabotage. They tried to paint Julian as an aggressor, arguing he'd baited the encounter to manufacture controversy. But that defense died in court. Because Julian never once raised his voice, never once reached, never once refused. He simply let the camera record and the law do what it rarely gets to do in these cases, tell the truth with evidence instead of outrage. The trial wasn't public, but the records were. Grant was found guilty of violating departmental procedures, initiating an unlawful stop, and making false statements in an official report. Internal emails showed he'd tried to redact key evidence. His badge was stripped. His pension was frozen pending further investigation. And in a quiet, cold courtroom, when asked if he had anything to say before final sentencing, Grant stood silent. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't Julian's to hold, it was his. The fallout didn't stop with one officer. Julian's data exposed 10 more officers with traffic stop records that mirrored the same patterns. Unnecessary stops, biased language, and wrongful searches that never resulted in arrest. One officer had searched 78 black drivers and issued only 4 citations. Another had targeted out-of-county plates driven by minority motorists near luxury shopping centers. The DOJ issued mandatory retraining programs, but Julian went further. He proposed a new digital monitoring system developed by his team, an AI-based auditing tool that scanned patrol logs in real time, flagged anomalies in race, duration, and outcome of stops, and alerted oversight panels. The department had no choice but to implement it. And in doing so, They turned over control not just of data, but of accountability. The local police union resisted at first, but after public pressure mounted and lawsuits loomed, they backed off. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about survival in a system that people were no longer willing to excuse. 2 months later, the city passed the Mercer Clause, a legislative amendment that required bodycam footage to be released within 14 days of any disputed incident. Civilian oversight presence in use of force reviews. Mandatory racial bias audits every quarter. And a ban on officers working active duty within 100 days of a sustained complaint. Julian didn't ask for credit. He didn't want his name on the plaque. But when the vote passed, the city council held a moment of silence, not in mourning, but in respect. Respect for a man who didn't shout, didn't retaliate, but recorded, exposed, and reformed. By now, Julian had gone viral twice. Interviews, think pieces, and college panel invitations, but he declined most of them. He wasn't chasing fame. He was building something lasting. The day after Grant's final appeal was denied, Julian returned to the same intersection where it all began. Not with a camera this time, but with a clipboard, some folding chairs, and a banner. Know Your Rights, free legal aid plus documentation workshop. Dozens of people came. Young men with questions, mothers with concerns, retired teachers. A few off-duty officers, standing at the edge, were watching but not intervening. One teenager asked, "How do I stop them from profiling me?" Julian looked him in the eye and said, "You can't always stop it, but you can expose it. You can record it. You can outlast it. And when you do, don't. Just post the video. File the paperwork. Show up. Speak up. That's how we win. One form, one case, one car ride at a time." This wasn't the story of a badge being shown to end a traffic stop. It was the story of truth outlasting power, of silence used not as submission, but as strategy, of one man using the very system built to ignore him, to watch him instead. Julian Mercer didn't pull rank. He pulled back the curtain and made the system see itself. The headlines faded, as they always do. New scandals took their place. But something had shifted, quietly, permanently, in the city of East Clayton. Not because a man yelled, not because someone fought back with fists, but because a man named Julian Mercer refused to walk away empty-handed. He didn't just survive a wrongful stop. He rewrote what it meant to respond to one, with strategy, with clarity, and with something this country too often demands from black men: unshakable restraint in the face of provocation. Months passed. The streets stayed the same. Trees still leaned over cracked sidewalks, and the patrol cars still rolled slowly past corner stores. But now, they moved differently, with caution, with awareness, with body cams that weren't turned off by accident anymore, and with new oversight policies that made it clear: you never know who's recording, you never know who's watching. Julian didn't become a celebrity. He didn't start a podcast or write a memoir. What he did was return to the same community center every Saturday and sit across from kids who looked like him, answering questions they shouldn't have to ask. "Mr. Mercer, what do I do if they lie on me?" "You don't panic," he'd say. "You document. You speak clearly. You file the report. You keep the truth tight, because the truth, written right, doesn't crack." His story became a case study. Law schools used it. DOJ training programs referenced it. Officers in other departments were shown the footage as a reminder. You're not above the law just because you enforce it. But for Julian, the real victory wasn't federal reform or press conferences. It was the message he left behind in the way he moved through the world after that day. You see, that traffic stop could have destroyed him. In another reality, it ends with him cuffed, beaten, or worse, silent forever. That's what makes the outcome so powerful. Not just because justice was served, but because Julian had prepared for injustice and met it with undeniable truth. And in doing so, he taught the nation something we often forget. True authority doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to flash a badge. It just needs to stand still, unafraid when the world expects it to crumble. His car. He still drives it, not out of spite, out of principle. Because every time he steps into it, every time he fastens that seatbelt and starts the engine, it's a reminder, a symbol, that the thing once used to silence him is now what carries him forward. At a scholarship gala later that year, Julian gave a short speech, just one sentence, no notes, no applause cues. He simply said, "They pulled me over, thinking I didn't belong." But I wasn't the one lost. He left the stage to silence, the good kind. The kind that happens when a room finally realizes the story they just heard wasn't about a car or a cop or even a traffic stop. It was about power. How easily it's abused. And how beautifully it can be reclaimed when someone chooses truth over ego and justice over rage. If you've ever felt overlooked, profiled, or dismissed, remember Julian's story. Remember that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the calm before the truth arrives. And when it does, even the ones holding the badge might have to answer for what they refuse to see.